wanted to volunteer to do this session was because done a project which I alluded to at one of the previous user groups, where I only just got hold of the brief for what the project was, and that project's now completed. And I have to say it was really quite eye-opening for me, and it was also one of the most enjoyable projects I've worked on for a long time. So I'm really happy to sort of let everyone know how it turned out. So I've got about 10 slides, I think, and then I'll hopefully show you the solution working. So the project was working with NHS Business Services Authority, and Rob Hill's the guy who was the sort of development lead or product owner or something like that. He's quite happy for me to talk about it. So there's no sort of proprietary IP in anything that we do here. So any of you guys can reproduce this solution for your own sort of variation of it. And I think, as you'll see, there's lots and lots of potential applications for this. So the people that we're talking to are an area of the Business Service Authority called the Margin Survey team. Margin survey is something that's, I still don't profess to understand exactly what it is, but the grey box at the bottom of the screen sort of explains it, I think. And paraphrasing that, what it is pharmacies that set up in hospitals and health centres and so on. They're sort of paid by a number of different mechanisms for the services that they provide. So one of them is sort of direct payment for the services, but some part of their payment is sort of clawed back, if you see what I mean, based on the margins that they make from the drugs that they sell. So the margin survey is all about working out what margin the pharmacies have been making on the drugs, so that the Department for Health actually, you know, in gross, they actually pay less because they subtract the profit that's been made out of the margin, something like that anyway. But it's been going, I think, since maybe 10 years or more. And it's quite a labour intensive and less than ideal process that they go through. So rather than every pharmacy sending all their data electronically, there are quite a large number of them that either can't or won't send the data electronically. Some of them could, but they want to be paid to do it and so on. So there's quite a lot that stick to the rules from 10 years ago, which is, if asked, they must provide basically the original documents for all the invoices that they've received for a month. So what happens is the margin survey sort of poll a minimum of 20 pharmacies randomly selected per month. Each pharmacy provides all their invoices, which is on average 650 pieces of paper a month per pharmacy, of which there are 20. And those pieces of paper invoices contain sometimes 20 to 30 line items with different drugs that have been bought by the pharmacy. What happens is people mark them up with yellow highlighter pens and biros, and it's not possible to mark up all 650 times 20, what is it, 13,000 or something, pieces of paper for every drug. So the Department for Health selects a couple of drugs per month that are the subject of the investigation, if you like. So they scan by eye down the invoices and highlight if the invoice contains one of the drugs of interest for that month, and then the highlighted items are then transcribed into an Access database, and then they're used for calculations and onward processing, which I don't really know much about. So it's very manual labour intensive process, and it's very limited polling. There are 11,500 pharmacies that fall into this category, and only 20 per month are being covered, and only 2 to 3 drugs per month. So the challenge that we were set, which I alluded to, which is, could we, working together, sort of speed, automate and scale this process using Azure and AI? Could we extend it to all 11,500 pharmacies and all drugs? And could we provide a solution that's speed, accurate and affordable? So that was the project. We kicked off at the end of February, completed end of March. We had limited sample data sets to work with, so 6 suppliers, 20 invoices per supplier, working in a sort of agile, collaborative way to sort of emerge an architecture and also emerge a solution as we went. So the invoices that we're dealing with I've sort of, the delivery addresses and names were already redacted. I've redacted some extra stuff just in case when we publish the deck, but yeah, so batches of invoices, and there are different formats from the different suppliers. So BNS, the first invoice there, is very different to the Phoenix invoice, as you can see. Also note, there's lots of handwritten marks on. I think the pharmacies are using these invoices as goods received documents and things like that. So they're actually checking the deliveries off against the invoices and so on. So what architecture emerged, I think, is probably the clearest way to explain it, because it's not actually very visual. Most of this, a lot of it is batch processing. So I try and explain the architecture, and it might help then when you see it to put the two sides of the coin together. So ideally, the invoices will be delivered in boxes. They are delivered in boxes and they're scanned today. Ideally, you can get REST plugins and things like that for scanners. So our sort of approach was to create sort of drop blob storage accounts or blob storage containers with a view to when we productionize this, to actually just put in an interface in between the scanner and the blob storage. We created an event grid subscription which detects any creation of any object on that storage account, which means that we don't need to, if we create more drop locations, the event grid subscription will still pick it up, which is something actually Phil and I were talking to Rolls-Royce about a similar problem, and they haven't approved event grid for that for use, and actually it would have been an ideal solution to solve their problem as well. Once the image appears in the drop location, the event grid subscription fires and basically adds metadata. It puts it on a queue, so it puts on a storage queue, and that triggers an Azure function called the router. And the router adds metadata onto that image. So what's the run number, what's the date and time, that sort of stuff. And then puts it into another storage container. In this case, the recognizing image container. That triggers the recognizer function, the one that does the majority of the work to run. It occasionally fires exceptions, unsupported document types and things like that, but generally it manages to recognize the document and create an output JSON document. That in turn goes into another blob storage location and triggers the processor function. So the processor function takes the recognized JSON, which is now a text representation of what was on the image document, and it shreds that effectively and puts it into a relational database. So I originally thought maybe using Cosmos or something, but a combination of cost and the way that people wanted to process it downstream meant that a nice small Azure SQL database was absolutely fine for this. And then that database is used to produce some basic Power BI reports, and all we've done is mocked up what they might look like. I haven't gone any further than that at the moment. And then the other sort of leg of the architecture is, how do you train the form recognizer model? So there's a labeling tool with Form Recognizer v2 that lets you sort of assisted learning for the model, and you can play around. You can sort of what if scenario the way that you tag a form or set of sample forms so that the model gets better at recognizing. And then when you're happy with that, we've got a console app that basically submits that to another queue, which then runs the trainer function, which trains the model, but also stores the model ID for that particular document format in the database, so that when we send a document maybe from Alliance or Phoenix or Sigma through the original drop zone, we actually can look up in the database what version of the model and what model we need to use to recognize it. So I was sort of pretty happy with that architecture. It's fully serverless. It's pay-per-use pricing. So the cost basically predictable according to the number of documents that you process through. It's fully instrumented using App Insights, which is sort of absolutely critical because it's almost impossible to debug without that. So it's got automatic scalability, so I can fire thousands of documents at it simultaneously, and subject to one little caveat, it works fine. There's a fully automated repeatable deployment pipeline with this. So I deployed it for another customer this afternoon who's got pretty much the exact same requirement, and it was up and running in sort of 15 minutes. What else was there? Yeah, so all the data in the blob storage and so on, and SQL database can be replicated to the second Azure region just by configuration change. We don't do that at the moment. And a couple of interesting points. So I actually wrote the functions using just standard console apps and then converted them into functions. Two of them, the trainer and the recognizer, actually do asynchronous calls when they talk to cog services. So I should probably convert those functions to be durable functions, because at the moment I'm polling for the results. And that's keeping the functions alive, and therefore they're being charged for. Whereas if I did them as durable functions, then I think it would save an amount of money, probably not too much, but some. And the other interesting point is when I have run multiple hundreds and hundreds of invoices simultaneously, I do sometimes get losses on the triggers on the blob storage. So I think if I was doing it for real, we'd probably use the service bus queue and put the document into blob storage, and then use the queues to do the triggers rather than use the blob storage triggers. And Matthew might have some comments on that at the end, maybe. So yeah, first part. Form recognizer, custom labels, training. So the point here is that the form recognizer will do OCR, and the version 1 form recognizer would then attempt to parse tables in documents to derive both the name of the data element and the content for the data element. Form Recognizer v2, we've only really tried to use v2 because v1 was just almost impossible to handle the output of the recognition, because both the tags and the values, if you like, the names and the values, were variable based on the content of the document. So it's almost impossible to write an object-oriented program to interpret those things, because it was just an amorphous mass of data. So we use the labels. That means that the label names, like tax date, for example, they're in the green. Regardless of the document format, the tax date is always called tax date. And the order number is always called order NO. which means that the code that shreds the JSON documents, regardless of the format that the document came in, can be consistent. So it's really small amount of code that processes the recognized JSON and puts it into SQL. And if you add a new tag, then that doesn't make it to the database, which it would do if maybe we're using Cosmos or something, but it doesn't break anything. And then you could make a small amendment to the code, or you could potentially write some kind of plugin or something to be able to extend the code without changing the rest of it. But the tool, I'll show it to you in a minute, runs either online or in a container. You make your tags, but you can also then test the effect of tagging. So you can train the model with the new tags that you've put in. With the additional tags, you can add more invoices and then train the model based on more data. And then you can upload a sample document that wasn't in your training data set and see how it interprets the document. So it's pretty useful, pretty interesting stuff. We train the model on 8 to 10 invoices because we only have 20 in the set, and each field is trained manually, but it is a simple one-time activity. So at the moment, the margin survey team is managers plus 6 full-time employees doing those 20 pharmacy samples. So we've sort of worked out that ultimately, to cover the whole country, those 6 FTEs could be repurposed as model trainers. If we were to extend the current way of doing it, just by scaling that by adding more people, it would take 1,300 people to cover the 11,500 pharmacies, 20 drugs per invoice. So once we've trained the model, what data quality do we get? Some of it we get very good data quality, so invoice numbers, accounts and things like that, quantities, units, prices, certainly all above 85 to 90, maybe even 100%. A couple of ones more problematical. I'm not quite sure why the postcode's 45% actually, so I won't make anything up. But yeah, this is a not a binary decision. So if we can get 80-90% of the invoices through, then we get sort of proportional benefit. So if there are a few problems, we log them for investigation, but in many cases it doesn't actually prevent the invoice being processed to conclusion. That might not always be the case. We obviously learned some lessons on how we might improve the accuracy. So probably the biggest impact would be a larger training data set and more training. The second one, my colleague Mark wrote that bullet point. I'm not quite sure that it's a positive. it's more of a negative, so I won't cover that one. Rendering capabilities. So there are algorithms that might help to increase contrast before we run OCR, or maybe remove some of those tick marks and things like that. But probably the best benefit I think that we could add would be lookup directories. So we didn't have access to the sort of official database of NHS drug names, but when it goes to production, they will. So they'll be able to do some kind of fuzzy match on the drug names, because even when it's not fully recognized, large parts of maybe a 30-character chemical drug name are recognized properly. It's usually just a character or two that doesn't work. And again, postcodes lookups could be done. In the invoices that we had, the addresses were redacted, but if they weren't, we would have been able to use postcode lookup or something to improve that as part of the POC. So I thought I'd just show you how it all works. So first demo is training a model. So that's the blue lines on here. So I'll show you the labeling tool, and then we'll use the Model Trainer console app to submit that to the main system. And then what that will do is it will use the data from the labeling tool. It will trigger the training function. It will call form recognizer, get the ID of the model for that use case, if you like, and then it will store the ID of the model in the database, so that in the second demo, when I put some invoices in, it will say, oh, this is a B&S invoice. I'll go and look up in the database to see what model I need to use, and then when it actually does the recognition, it will use that model and it will get the right results, hopefully. So the first thing to show is the model trainer. So this runs as, I'm running it as a container. So I just download a container, do a Docker pull, then do a Docker run, and that then creates a web server running on my local machine, port 3000, and then I just browse to that and I get this set of cloud projects. So if we look at the Alliance invoices, the invoices will load up down on the left here, and the first invoice will appear there. If I, how do I do this? Yeah, so you can see that my colleague Mark has actually tagged this invoice, and those tags are the names over on the right there. And you can see there's a stamp for NHS BSA 00139. That's what the person that's processed it manually has stamped to say that this invoice has been received. How do I get this magnifier up? Hold on. Yeah, so imagine that we're all quite happy with this, but now they want to do something with the BSA reference. Then what we would do is we would add a new tag here, and we'd call it something like BSA ref, and we'd say BSA ref is that green bit there. Click there and it recognizes it on this invoice as 00139. Then I'll go to this invoice and I'll say, yeah, this thing here is the BSA ref, and then it will recognize it as 154. And those can be all over the invoice. You know, these batch, they tend to have stamped them in roughly the same place. So I can quickly pick them out. But there's nothing to actually identify that is a BSA ref. You know, it's not referring to the fact that it says NHS BSA just above there or anything. It's actually going to learn that when it sees a number that looks like that in that sort of position on this type of form, then it will be the BSA ref. So I won't do them all. You imagine you go through your training set, then you can think, well, what difference does that make? So I'll train the model with the new data, and it will take probably about 30 seconds, I think it usually does. And it will give me some results so that I can work out whether it's looking promising or not. Yeah. And said, oh, well, BSA ref is 50% accuracy. Well, that's probably because I only did 50% of the invoices in the sample set. I don't know, but that's my guess. But then if I go here, I can say, oh, okay, I'll now I've trained my model. I will actually take one of the original images from. I think we're looking at Alliance, aren't we? I don't know. I think we are. Then if we take an Alliance invoice and then run the analysis on that invoice, this is one that's not seen before. Then it starts to say, okay, you got your order date, we've got your invoice number. BSA ref has got completely wrong, but I need to do some more model training, which I don't really have time for at the moment. But you can see how these tags help to, well, they more than help. They enable us to interpret the image at a high level of accuracy. So once we've done that model training effectively, then we can run the command line application, console app. Yeah, this is where I get confused because I've got too many of them. Yeah, which is the model trainer. And what that will do is it will take the documents that the training outputs from the tool that you can see on the window behind, and it will put them into a blob container ready for the trainer function to pick up. As it happens, I developed this application before I was familiar with the training tool, so I didn't know that all the training assets are already in a storage account. So what I'm doing is putting them into a different storage account. I don't really need to do that, but so that will basically delete any that I already had. It will upload those assets, so that's the documents themselves, the project, and the OCR JSON and the labels onto a storage account. And then the last thing it will do is it will put a record on a training queue that should kick off the training function for whoever that was that I ran that for, which was Alliance. So what we should find if we go, and this is where App Insights will have a little delay, so I won't be able to show you exactly that run without waiting for up to 5 minutes, but I should be able to look at my functions and see that the trainer function has run. This will be the time before the meeting that I ran it. Need to monitor it. Yeah, and it ran successfully this morning, I think. And there's all the App Insights sort of trace for that run. I can, if I want to, go crack open the actual App Insights and go and look at faults and errors and things like that, but I won't do that right now. Yep, so what we should be able to see is that in the database, we've then got a record for model training. Yeah, so there's Alliance model. The model ID is, let's put the, yeah, so the, is that coming up in magnified mode on the yep. Video?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So you got the model ID, when it was created. I think that's the one I've just run, isn't it? And some metadata about it. So that was Alliance. The average accuracy was 76%. And there's the training results is actually the JSON, which is the whole set of results from that training run. So that's all stored in the database, which means that now we'll be able to submit some actual Alliance invoices and to see those go through. So if we go to the blob storage, staging account, this is the one that triggers the event hub, sorry, the event grid subscription. So if I go into drop Alliance, this is effectively identifying the invoices that I upload as being on the Alliance format. But if I upload some of those, then sometimes takes a few seconds for the event grid subscription to pick them up, but I'll just make sure I chose them from the right folder, because if I get the wrong, yeah, those are Alliance ones, that's good. Oh, so they've all been processed, so that means that in terms of the architecture, We've done all the blue. Now we're just starting to do the green. So we've dropped some invoices into the drop location, triggered the event grid subscription, put a message on the incoming queue, which hopefully has triggered the router, and that will have, as I say, added metadata. So it does things like calculate an image thumbprint. So BSA's requirements were if the same image got sent in multiple times, they wanted to process it multiple times. But I put in the thumbprint using a MD5 hash so that I could, if I wanted to, throw an exception and say, oh, we've already processed this invoice, things like that. So lots of good stuff that you can slot in, almost like aspect-oriented programming. You could put pre-processor functions in here to improve the the contrast of the images, things like that. So pretty extensible. Once the router has picked it up and put it into the incoming blob storage account effectively, that will trigger the recognizer. That will call into cognitive services. That will put out a JSON document that will then be picked up by the processor and put into the SQL database, hopefully. So we just come off there. Probably the easiest way to see that while we're waiting for the app insights to come through would either be to go back to our app insights here and turn on the live metrics, and then to go over here, maybe look at the BSS, BNS invoices, upload a few of those. Get the document format right. Put those up, upload them, and then hopefully we should start to see the processing occurring on the live metrics. Still uploading at the moment. Some of those are appearing now. So we should, every other time I've done this, start to see live metrics appearing here for these as these invoices are processed, but we're not for some reason. So I won't worry too much about why that is right now. If I then go to my SQL Server again, and I take a look at, there were some records in the database, but with an ID of less than 18 when I started. So if I look at the actual outputs of the process, these are all the ones that I've just submitted. And it seems like on the Alliance ones, it's not pulling out tax date very well at all. It's not pulling out order date, and on the, but it is getting the invoice number, and on the BNS ones, it's pretty much getting everything by the looks of things. If I look at the line items, we can actually see here that in most cases it's getting the drug perfectly, and there's some of those are pretty complicated names, and some of them are marked up with pens and pencils, which is quite often why they don't appear. We can calculate almost always. We can get the let's go down to the BNS ones, which are much better than the Alliance. They've been trained a lot better. So we can pretty much always get the unit price, and we can always get the net amount. I think we haven't tried too much on the VAT codes because it's not really needed. Line quantities are sometimes a problem, but just it happens for us, and we can always calculate that because we know we always get the unit price and the amount, and where we do pull it out, then it's right. The other thing that we do is we log any errors that we see. So basically, in this case, the this invoice here, invoice ID 19, the get string method on the order number is null, so it didn't return an order number, and that's identified as a warning because they don't actually care what the order number is, so we didn't worry too much about that. Here we can see there's a terminal error, and that's the element drug05 does not exist. So it would put that out if one of the items in the 05 line of the invoice does exist, but the drug name doesn't exist. So that would be considered as a terminal error. And someone would either need to manually correct that, or we just wouldn't include it in the sample. They haven't sort of quite decided on how they would process that yet. But hopefully if we go back now to App Insights, which I'm still puzzled as to why that didn't show, but if we go back to App Insights, go back to the function app, we should be able to see the invocations that ran to process that. So we should see that the router ran quite a few times just recently. Yeah, and we can see the full details of what happened during the routing and so on. And yep, so if I just return to my presentation. So processing batch of invoices, and the visualization, so it's basically some gratuitous Power BI. So we just showed that the SQL Server tables can be presented in Power BI, and you know, if they wanted to group it by postcode, which they don't, then obviously they can do the maps and so on. So summary really, it's effective. The AI, the form recognizer, is effective for the margin survey use case. The accuracy is pretty strong out of the box, and you can enhance it. The platform is pretty much infinitely scalable and extensible. It's cost effective as well. So 20 pharmacies, 650 pages of invoices, 13,000 forms, cost 243 quid, which, you know, probably isn't even the expenses for one of the guys that process it, plus the Azure run costs, which are, to be honest, reasonably negligible compared to the cost of the form recognizer. Opportunity to scale to more pharmacies, more items per month, and actually other document formats as well. They do quite a lot of this sort of thing. So we handed over in April. We sort of did one of these talks basically about the progress. We were supposed to be presenting to the board, but because of the COVID crisis, the board were unable to attend. So we just recorded one of these sessions and put a link to it for them, and they went through the presentation and decided that they did want to go ahead and productionize. So they've engaged Altius, who is one of their normal sort of SIs, that to help them productionize it. And I'm currently working on an almost identical project. So as I say, I deployed the core infrastructure today. We're going to train the model tomorrow. And then hopefully we should be recognizing invoices on Friday, which is pretty quick way of doing it, I think. Yeah, and I think that's really all I wanted to say. I'm happy to take any questions or share more or discuss other things related to this if you like, show you the DevOps part of it.
Nick, Jason sort of made a comment earlier. I don't know if you can see it. He's saying it's great. Wouldn't it be easier and more accurate to force the distributors to send the NHS their invoice data digitally?
Yeah, so that was actually covered on the slides. So they already do in the vast majority of cases. These are the people that either refuse to do it or would charge a significant amount of money in order to do it. Yeah.
So they're anti-modernisation.
Yeah.
Well,
So
they're making money out of it. They're
yeah. In
making
fact,
money
one
out
of the
of it.
people that I'm working with is one of the people that refuses to do it in a different arm of their business.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So they've already got like an EDI mechanism that, you know, a lot of the companies that do this, AstraZeneca and so on, actually send the data electronically. These are the people who've just said, no, we can't do it. We're too small, or we don't have the money to invest in producing the system, that sort of thing. And there's 11,500 of those.
There's another comment from Jason if you want to read it.
A repeating block structure for recognizing as many or few invoice line structure. Yeah, so that's actually in the pipeline for Form Recognizer version 2. It was in Form Recognizer version 1. You could actually say this is a table, but it went away with the tagging mechanism, and it is supposed to be coming back. I haven't checked on when, but it's relatively soon, I think. So anyone else got any questions?
Will it be available for review? Yes, it will. So I think Nick mentioned before that when we did the last one 6 weeks ago, he posted the videos on YouTube because of the size. So we'll do the same thing. So for those of you who are new to the meetup group, we have a LinkedIn group, which is funnily enough called the Midlands Azure User Group. So if you're not on it, by all means, please join it, because we'll do a general post on LinkedIn. I'll do it this time with links to the recordings, which I'll push up onto YouTube. And if you're going to have a look on YouTube and just do a search for Midlands Azure User Group, you'll find the links to the 2 previous sessions from the last one. One was on Azure NetApp files, and the other one was on Azure, what we've referred to as Azure Data Ops. You won't find recordings for any of the other previous ones, because when we've done these, obviously face to face, we've not recorded them because we encourage people to turn up in person to get the benefit of socialising and mingling and chatting to everyone. But yeah, keep your eyes posted. I'll hopefully get the post up there tomorrow and load them up as well, so they'll be available.
Yeah, to answer Dave's question, what happens during the recognizer and the trainer functions is we submit a job effectively for analysis. What I've done is basically I do a thread.sleep for 3 seconds, and then 6 seconds, and so on, and then just check to see whether the job is finished. I think that if we were to use durable functions, what that would effectively do is the workflow would go to sleep at the point where I submit the job, and then it would get a call back and wake up at the time that the job was completed. And that would mean that, you know, I'm not using potentially 30 seconds of function execution time and paying for that 30 seconds while I'm just waiting for a job that nearly always takes 30 seconds to run, basically. So the durable functions, I think there are a number of patterns described on how you can use them, but I think that is one where you're waiting for the asynchronous results of a request. So I think that, you know, if I'm involved in this, that's one of the areas I'd look at changing the way it works. Like, as I say, the other one is probably to still use blob storage, but actually trigger everything on service bus queues so that I get sort of exactly once or whatever semantics for the messages that I submit.
I think you could probably get rid of the first part of your functions and just replace it with a single durable as well.
Yeah, happy to talk about it, Matthew. I'm working on it again, as I say, so I think it's something that can be improved. In terms of Jason's, yeah, I think so. I put it on GitHub today. I haven't sent the link out yet, but I can publish the link at the user group at some point in the future. I just want to have a little think and probably create some GitHub actions. So everything's in Azure DevOps at the moment for the customer, but the repo is private on GitHub just at the moment while I have a think. But if I create actions, then it'd be pretty easy to clone the repo and create your own, or fork the repo and then run the actions, and then you pretty much get what you asked for in terms of bundling it up, so you could try it. Yeah, and if I do, I'll put it on the LinkedIn group for the Midlands user group as to what the link is for the GitHub repo, and hopefully we can just do it as a single-click deploy from GitHub.
Nick, how's the forms recognizer distributed? How's that? How do you get access to that?
So it's actually pretty much black box for me. I'll show you. I'm just trying to get rid of this magnifier. So in here, we have a form recognizer endpoint.
Right.
Yeah, and basically, this is all I know. Yeah, other than the API. Yeah. So I know it's in UK South. I know it's an S0 SKU, and I know it's this endpoint because I gave it that name. And these are the keys that I need in my config files to be able to access it. But really, that's all you see. Yeah, because it is a software as a service or platform as a service sort of component. And in terms of creating it, you just simply type form recognizer and create one just by filling those few fields in, and away you go.
Wow.
Any other questions?
I think that's it.
Okay, great.
Wonderful.
Hope everyone found it useful.